Hello and welcome to the national debate. A new world order is in effect, ladies and gentlemen, as the US-Iran war appears far from over, even as a fragile ceasefire remains in place. The conflict, which has been ongoing for over a month, shows little sign of ending, with both sides remaining firm on their initial positions and limited room left for negotiation. However, its impact on other countries is significant. Many world leaders have welcomed the ceasefire announcement, hoping for some relief in oil and energy markets. Yet, the Strait of Hormuz remains under severe strain, with the passage of all ships still restricted. So the big question is, are we heading towards a new geopolitical order in West Asia? And who really is the winner of this war? Let's quickly, in fact, take you through the first talking point. In fact, as far as the new order that we're talking about the situation before, where the Strait of Hormuz was largely a free global passage, and after it is now controlled in terms of transit, ships are expected to pay a toll for each time they pass through. Earlier, the oil prices were relatively stable, and now the oil prices have become highly volatile with massive ups and downs that we've seen over the past 40 days. Earlier, Iran was under heavy sanctions, and now it appears that some sanctions on Iran are to be lifted because that is part of the deal that Iran is negotiating. Before, Iran was willing to negotiate its nuclear program. Now it refuses to halt uranium enrichment activities as well. Earlier, we had seen Iran that was governed by the supreme leader, and now more military control in terms of the decision-making, with the IRGC also seeing several of the hardline leaders coming in. What are we talking about in terms of the two-week ceasefire? Because clearly, while US-Iran are calling it a truce, what really are the main points coming out of this particular ceasefire? We can quickly bring in that graphic as well, because there's a halt in military attacks on both sides that we are seeing. There's also the safe transit through Hormuz after Iran's nod, but that was also later stopped after Israel's strikes that took place on Lebanon. And this, of course, is one of the most important aspects of this. Let's quickly open this up and take it across to our guests who are joining us. With us is Ashok Sajjanar, former diplomat. Also with us is Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, who's a defense expert. Joining us also on the show is Ilham Karkhodai, who's an assistant professor of West Asian Studies in the University of Tehran. We also have, of course, with us James Barlow, foreign and defense analyst. John Rossomando is a geopolitical and national security strategist who's with us. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Mordechai Kedar is Israeli defense expert, and Ina Tangent, senior fellow of the Tahe Institute and chairman of Asia Narratives, is also with us. Let me start with you first. James Barlow, what are we looking at? While, of course, we are seeing JD1s heading towards Islamabad, there's all possibilities of talks over there, and it remains to be seen what happens. The very fact that the ceasefire collapsed so soon after its announcement is raising serious questions about whether it can be negotiated within the fortnight of peace that is planned.
Well, it's very unclear exactly how or why the ceasefire collapsed, if indeed it did collapse, because, of course, if you're referring to the missiles that went to Kuwait, the Iranian regime, whichever one Donald Trump and his people are negotiating with, say they were not responsible. But they say that it was another group inside of Iran. So that, if that's true, that's proof positive that you've got various breakups within the IRGC, which is something very interesting to note, and whether there's a more hard line coming across. His plane, as you know, Vice Presidents took off about 15 or 20 minutes ago, heading to Islamabad. Both sides are looking for positive talks, but nevertheless, I think that there's three vital things that are on the agenda. Number one, of course, is the Strait of Hormuz, to get that open and to find out how much they're charging, because what Iran insists is it's their territorial water. They can do what they want. But as you correctly said, that before this started 6.5 weeks ago, boats, ships were flowing in and out non-stop. So now the Iranians who've lost their navy, who have lost their air force, who've been hit really, really hard, have found that their greatest weapon at this point is the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, they're charging tolls. Now, there is some speculation that Donald Trump wants to get in on this and say, okay, well, maybe we can do a business deal and we can both charge some of the ships going through. I don't think the world is going to look very favorably upon that. That's point number one. Number two is the enriched uranium. 60% of enriched uranium, that has to be found and it has to be taken out of Iran, period. There is no deal on that. There should be no compromise on that. The Americans must insist on finding that enriched uranium. And the third point is this speculation about this 10-point deal, because the Americans and the Israelis say that Lebanon was not involved in this whatsoever. And whatever you do, whatever Donald Trump says to the Israelis are not going to withdraw from southern Lebanon because they are protecting their citizens. And for the last 20, 25 years, hundreds of thousands of Hezbollah rockets have gone into Israel. And this time they mean business. They're not leaving Lebanon. They will fight to protect their citizens.
But the big question is, what if it actually threatens the peace? Because if that is a deal breaker, then certainly, of course, is the entire effort which impacts so many countries and the global economy. Is it really worth it? Let me bring in Ina Tangent on that. Ina Tangent, if Lebanon was never part of the deal, as is being stated now by Israel, as is being stated by several others, even J.D. Vance and the White House press secretary have all referred to that. The big question is that how are we going to find peace if there is a war raging in one particular country, or at least conflict raging in one particular country?
Well, I don't think Lebanon is a small detail, and so it shows an incredible amount of incompetence. These kind of bleating retorts that somehow Israel is defending itself while it wages war on the entire Middle East is nonsense. We have to look at the reality here, and that is the world is suffering because the United States and Israel had an unprovoked attack on Iran during peace negotiations, which were yielding what they wanted, which was to get the nuclear substances out of Iran. And now you have a situation where everybody knew that the Straits of Hormuz would be used. This kind of idea that it's a surprise is nonsense. You can go back to countless white papers put out by the Pentagon and also reinforced by the CIA, including to Donald Trump before he made this incredible blunder. So at this point, the question is, can the rest of the world stand up, tell the U.S. to stop acting like a child, tell Iran that they have to allow the Straits of Hormuz to go through because they're damaging other countries who are not part of this. So, but it's going to take a large group, not just Pakistan and China, but the BRICS, South America, Africa, ASEAN, you name it. They have to come together and tell these two children to put it aside.
Let me quickly bring in John Rosamondo as well. John Rosamondo, the question is this, that if the ceasefire is collapsing so quickly, if the details have not been properly worked out, what really was going on? Was this a deliberate pause by the United States to sort of regroup and replan its and recalibrate its activities? Because Donald Trump also said so, that if they don't actually, agree to their terms, then they're ready to restart the attack and restart the campaign of war. What really are we looking at, or was it just poor negotiation and poor coordination on part of the negotiators? In this case, it's Pakistan.
Well, I mean, if I look at everything that's happened, the idea that we're in a ceasefire is a farce. I mean, Dubai came under attack from Iran. Kuwait came under attack from Iran. Tel Aviv came under attack from Iran. I mean, the only thing that stopped was the United States decided to pause bombing. I mean, potentially, if you look at the movement of American naval forces to set up the next phase of the war 2 weeks from now. So I don't see that there's any real ceasefire, and so far it's just a farce.
All right, let me bring in Lieutenant Raj Shukla. Lieutenant Raj Shukla, what really has happened over here? We were told that this is a cessation in terms of activities. Yes, Israel then strikes Lebanon on multiple locations, and over 230, if I'm not mistaken, dead, over 800 injured there. What kind of a ceasefire is this is a question, and where really have things gone so horribly wrong that even after the various points are discussed via Pakistan, they are not able to come to a decision?
What has actually happened is this, that despite America's overwhelming military neutering of Iran, Trump has handed over the Strait of Hormuz to Iran. The principle of freedom of navigation is dying or is dead, and it has been replaced by a new lexicon of choke point control. And this choke point control is working. And therefore, you have this ceasefire. Now, the problem in the ceasefire is, what are you going to negotiate about? The custody of the 500-odd kgs of enriched uranium moving to a neutral place under space surveillance still seems to have some kind of, outcome. I mean, there is a possibility, though distant. But this insistence of the Trump administration of no enrichment, not even for civilian use, is just unimplementable. And look at the other claims. Now the facts and the bluster are being separated. Hexet says we've destroyed all missile production facilities. General Dan Kane says we have merely targeted 80% of production facilities. Look at the cracks in the politico-military edifice. Randy George dissenting. Now I'm told Brad Cooper is arguing about the legitimacy of targets. From the briefings that are being given, I can sense some discomfort between Hexet and Dan Kane. And now if that New York Times article is to be believed, in retrospect, and it sounds very authentic to me, nobody was on board. Rubio called it bullshit. The CIA director called it farcical. Vance said, you've always known my opposition, but I'm going along. So was this just Trump's war? And if it was Trump's wars, he did take a lot of risks, but the outcomes don't seem to be too good. And so now I think, Trump is left with no incentive to resume the shooting war, but few cards to end the military odyssey. So he's stuck in a great bind.
John, you want to respond to that? Is this really President Trump all the way, ignoring a lot of good counsel coming in from his top cabinet members and intelligence chiefs, his various secretaries in charge of various important departments? And to what avail? Because clearly what has happened is that earlier you had a situation where the straits were not controlled by everyone. They are now controlled by Iran. And, in many, many ways, US has actually strategically lost the battle, many would say.
Well, I mean, I would say that everything that goes on in the Trump administration is Donald Trump. I mean, he is the administration. He has his advisors that give him counsel. But at the end of the day, it's President Trump. I think that people say that miscalculate. Everybody knew that Iran would take control of the Strait of Hormuz at the commencement of any military exercise. And it's been something we've known for like 40 years. So I think that, it's like now what do we do to, coerce the IRGC or whatever the unit is that controls the Strait of Hormuz to, back down, because now we have to deal with the reality. I mean, we can navel gaze over, whatever miscalculations President Trump made, but now we've got to deal with the situation and figure out how we're going to do it as a international community, considering international law says that Iran's in the wrong.
Right. And in fact, I want to bring in our guest from Israel as well. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Mordechai Kedar, the question that many are asking is that if US and Israel are close allies who are fighting this war, how is it possible that there was some kind of lack of coordination? If there is, some kind of attempt at reaching a deal, was it not confirmed or was it not communicated to Israel as to what the points of the agreement are? Because it's clearly this aspect of continuing to pound Lebanon that has proved to be a big sticking point.
Well, Israel and the United States are two different countries with two different places. We live in the Middle East, they live in America. We have sometimes different interests, but I think that the cooperation between Israel and the United States, which was along this war for almost 40 days, was marvelous, was great, to a degree that even American tankers were fueling Israeli bombers. To that degree, the connection and the conjugation between the two armies worked very, very well. And I think that there is not even one state in the world which knows to work so smoothly and so closely with the American superpower.
All right. Let me bring in fact, Ashok Sajaner on that. Ashok Sajaner, we saw a few days ago J.D. Vance, US Vice President, come out and say that and argue that it would be dumb for Iran to let peace talks collapse over Lebanon. Now, given the fact that US and Israel did not consider Lebanon to be part of the ceasefire deal, for these 2 weeks, how is it that they are going to convince Iran to ultimately sit down on the table and arrive at a deal? That's clearly going to be a big challenge, an uphill challenge at that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madhav. You're right. I think it's going to be a challenge, but I'm sure they are going to surmount that challenge. I think there are a large number of arguments, in my view, Madhav, that, logically, Lebanon does not seem as if it should or could be a part of this ceasefire deal. Basically, you see the conflict between and the confrontation between Israel and Lebanon did not start on the 28th of February when the rest of the conflict started. The conflict started 28th February when when Israel and the United States started hitting out at Iran, and after that, Iran also got into the act and started hitting out also at the Gulf states and so on and so forth. But the conflict between Israel and Lebanon, Hezbollah, that predates that 28th February. It's been going on really since October 2023, although there have been interregnums before that. But it has been going before that. So meaning, as an outside observer, I would find it very difficult to say that, when you sign a ceasefire deal, if the Hezbollah is firing at you, then how can you sort of, sit quietly and not take cognizance of it? And there are so many reports that have been emanating also that, some sort of a palace coup was in the works and so on and so forth. Even if you discount that, I think Lebanon is a separate country as such. So, when you're having the ceasefire, then it is only the protagonists who are involved in the conflict since 28th February, which should be included in my view. So I think there will be some discussion on that, but Iran also needs the ceasefire, as much as the United States and all the other countries need. So I think it might sort of, hem and haw and, express its unhappiness with
Let's
that.
get in our guest
But
from Iran on that.
ultimately, it will stay.
Elham Kadkoi is, of course, Assistant Professor of West Asian Studies at the University of Tehran. What do you make of this argument? Ultimately, Iran wants to end the war as much as the United States does. Is it possible that Lebanon can be kept off the table when you arrive at a deal?
Well, I believe that this deal and this ceasefire has been met with a lot of suspicion among the Iranians. We do not trust whatever the Americans say because, this has happened to us twice before. We were negotiating with them and then they attacked us unprovoked. So again, I think this time, this negotiation, this ceasefire is going to go on with a lot of pessimism from the side of the Iranians. Lebanon is part of this story because, first of all, Iran has stated very clearly that among its 10 points is that a ceasefire should include all fronts. That's something that Iran has said loud and clear even before the publication of those 10 points. This is something that Iran was insisting on. And Hezbollah is a very important and significant ally of Iran. So it's very, I think, meaningful for Iran to include Hezbollah. And when we say ceasefire,
all right, I think we've lost that line there. We'll try and reconnect, of course, with Elham in just a moment. But let me quickly take you to the next set of talking points that we're looking at in terms of what really is coming out of this entire conflict. One is, of course, why Lebanon is becoming a huge sticking point. There's two theaters specifically, apart from what's happening in Iran, is, of course, Israel's attacks on Lebanon. And they've, of course, entered far into the territory, about 30 kilometers in, as far as the border is concerned. US is not active, of course, in these Lebanon strikes. It's all Israel. But the larger question is that Iran and Pakistan say that the deal includes Lebanon. This is what they are claiming. But US and Israel say that dealing what's happening in Lebanon with what's happening in Iran. And of course, at the same time, Israel says that Hezbollah continues to remain a threat as far as Israel is concerned, and therefore they have to neutralize that threat. They have sought to end Iran's influence over Lebanon and Hezbollah as well. Hezbollah, of course, Iran says can't be kept out. They say that Hezbollah is a strategic arm, and therefore Iran fears losing regional leverage. This is, of course, the position that has been taken as far as Lebanon and, of course, this is concerned. Let's quickly look at the next set of talking points as well, because Hormuz also is a very, very important aspect. If we can quickly bring out what has happened in the Strait of Hormuz before we go back into the discussion, let's quickly pull up those graphics as well. What clearly has been stated, there's been warnings that have been coming in as far as Trump is concerned. Trump has said there's something big is going to happen. This is what he said on the 3rd of April. He then said, open up the strait, of course, using those profanities, a very controversial statement, or you'll be living in hell. This is what's stated on the 5th of April. On the 7th of April, Trump says the whole civilization will die tonight. And later he says that US has hit over 50 military targets on Kharg Island. This is on the 7th of April. On the 8th of April, Trump agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. And later, of course, we saw the different U-turns that have come in from the side of Trump as well, where the flip-flops happened. On the 8th of April, Hormuz toll is a beautiful thing, is what he stated. On the 10th of April, he said that Iran must stop the Hormuz toll. So these flip-flops on the side of the United States have also been coming in as far as Hormuz itself is concerned. And there's another aspect of the Hormuz toll, and that's in terms of what Oman has been saying. While on one hand, Iran said that they could perhaps share the toll as far as Oman is concerned. Oman then came out to say that they would not want to be part of this particular toll. And that's really what we've seen. Oman has said that they've signed maritime agreements, internationally speaking, and this cannot allow for fees to be imposed under these agreements that have been signed. No fees will be charged for passage is what Oman has said. They've also said their position on Strait of Hormuz is very, very clear. Let's quickly open this up and take it back to our guest now joining us. And let me begin with you. John Rossomando, what really are these flip-flops all about? Because you can't have a different policy position, in 48 hours. You can't say that it's a beautiful thing that we'll collect tolls together, and then you say that Iran can't collect tolls when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. There has to be some amount of sanity and clarity, and that clearly is missing in those statements coming in from President Trump.
Well, I think that President Trump, likes to keep people guessing. I think that a lot of his, strategic ambiguity, so to speak, with contradictory terms, is about, keeping a poker face. It's something that, if you read The Art of the Deal going back 40 years, has been part of his negotiation strategy. So I think that the president is trying to, keep everybody guessing, and only he really knows what's going on.
Is that an acceptable answer, Ashok Sajanhar, when it comes to international diplomacy? Because we quite haven't seen anything like this in the past, where positions change so rapidly within just 48 to 24 hours.
No, you're absolutely right. I don't think it's a very credible position because, he might think that he's keeping everyone guessing, but this is really harming his credibility. It is harming his trustworthiness. And in future, that means the people are not going to trust him. People are not going to believe in him. So I think meaning if it is a strategy, it's a very poor strategy. On the Strait of Hormuz, if you permit, Madhav, let me also say that, it is no one's private property per se. It is international waters. It is global commons. It is governed by the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, 1982. This is, Strait of Hormuz is not the only strait in the world. There are other straits. Bab el-Mandeb, there is Malacca Strait, there is Sunda, there's Lombok. Meaning, if you set a precedent here, that means all the other countries in Malacca Strait, you have Malaysia on one side, you have Indonesia on the other. Meaning, will you agree that they also start charging tolls? Meaning, what a huge impact it is going to have as far as global trade is concerned, the uncertainties that it will create. So I think we really have to, the world has to stand together on that. The sort of flip-flop that we have seen from President Trump is highly undesirable that, we are going to take a part of that toll. And the world has to come. We have to stand together and say that it has to be treated as the global commons. It has to be treated as international waters. Don't confuse it with Suez Canal, because that is a man-made canal. These are natural waterways. They have been used from time immemorial for trade purposes.
Absolutely. And in fact, this is what Refrigerant Raj Shukla also said. I want to bring in James Barlow on that. James Barlow, freedom of navigation, is such a basic right when it comes to international trade. Now, what from the Red Sea to the Straits of Malacca, if countries start charging just on the basis of how much military firepower they have? That's going to be the unfortunate fallout of this. And, that's something that will not be acceptable to most countries of the world.
Well, I think almost all the countries in the world, I'm very glad the word maritime has been used over here. Maritime law is international law. Everyone agrees with this, that it's international law. Whether it's true, whether technically Iran does have that as their own waters, it makes no difference. Maritime law, as I understand it, overrides that because it's free shipping inside and outside. As I understand it, a short while ago, there's about 600 carriers waiting to get out of the straits, but they can't get out. Some of them are loaded, but they don't know whether they're going to be charged a toll or not. And this is totally unacceptable. And it's the reason why NATO is very, very concerned, because, of course, President Trump has made all sorts of statements in the last few days, once again about NATO, whether he's pulling out, whether he's very angry with them. Well, he's certainly very angry with them. And now Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, is actually again speaking with President Trump. And I foresee that perhaps you may see an alliance of NATO trying to get involved to get the Straits of Hormuz open for the benefit of literally everyone around the world. And Iran is just going to have to buckle under. And I know that there are some Iranian speakers that say, well, this is our strength, this is our weapon, we will fight for this, it is our right to go ahead and charge. The international community is simply not going to allow this.
But,
so eventually
James
it's going to
Barlow,
open.
it's a bit rich.
Cost?
It's a bit rich because Trump himself said that we're going to collect tolls jointly with Iran. How suddenly does it now merit international military intervention? The hypocrisy is just writ large over all of these positions, isn't it?
Well, I'd like to know what goes on in those talks, which start tomorrow in Islamabad as well. I think all of us would like to be seated to hear exactly what is being said. Both sides obviously want an agreement. They don't want to go back to the war in 2 weeks' time because, of course, from America's point of view, that pushes up oil prices. It pushes up gas prices. The stock market goes down. And, of course, the election is coming up in America in November. So there is concern about that. But at the same time, you have to stay focused on the objective. And the whole reason why this all started about 6.5 weeks ago was literally about the enriched uranium. And I come back to that, the 460 kilograms of enriched uranium, this massive missile program, the intercontinental missile program. And once again, you know, this missile program has been going on for 15, 20 years. They've got missiles which already can hit Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and, of course, Riyadh. These missiles being made by the Iranians are not meant for the Middle East. They're meant for Rome. They're meant for Berlin, Paris and London, and they're also making them for Washington, D.C. The Americans are really concerned about this. And if you think that they're going to stop because this regime is going to stay in power, well, I don't think they will. That's why Hezbollah is being dealt with by Israel for protection against their civilians. So it's still very complicated. And there's a lot
There are two very important points that you've made. I'm going to come to our guest from Tehran on the ability of Iran to strike beyond Asia as well. But I want to bring in Lieutenant General Raj Shukla on the larger point that you made about the possibility of a NATO joint attack to keep the Strait of Hormuz, free from Iranian control. How realistic is that a possibility, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla? Because the kind of dominance that Iran has over that particular area, this would perhaps lead to a broader and much longer conflict once again.
Before I answer that question, let me just raise one larger issue. While I'm a great admirer of the American military, there is no other military in the world which can project power 2 oceans away. But may I commend to President Trump the wise words of a former CNC CENTCOM, General Tony Zinni, who said, I'm very proud of my military, but we must always strive to match our power with our purpose, our wisdom with our restraint. It is time for President Trump to realize the limits of his military power. So see what is happening. The precise question that you said, the way, traffic flows through the Strait of Hormuz, much of the sea lanes lie in Iran's territorial waters. It dominates those sea lanes tactically and strategically. Trump knows more than anybody else that the costs of reopening the strait through military means will have severe consequences. And therefore, this whole gung-ho-ishness, diplomacy being reduced to treachery, shooting while you negotiate, all this has to stop. I mean, targeted killings of top political leaders, they've worked for a while, but now, as Iran is arguing, are private residences of all political leaders legitimate targets? Trump has to widen his vision. Who's benefiting from all this? China. China, by providing, sodium percolate and drones to Iran, has sucked the United States of America deeper into the West Asian vortex and made them pivot out of the Indo-Pacific, THAADs, MEU, so on and so forth. The Gulf allies privately are saying that you have prioritized Israel over us. So despite the military victory, Trump has to ask this honest question that at the end of it, is America diminished? Is America even more isolated? And if that is the case, he has to pull back. there are limits to military power. There are limits to the hubris of American power. This is a time to, very, shall I say, with wisdom, ponder over these questions.
I think that's a very, very important point that you've made. And before I take it across to our American guests, let's quickly get in Ina Tangent on that. Ina Tangent, would you agree with the Lieutenant General when he says that China has literally furthered this war while not being actively participating in it? And in a sense, US has walked into that trap and further got sucked into the war. Do you agree with that contention?
No, I don't. I mean, the idea that somehow Beijing convinced Donald Trump to go against the Pentagon, also the CIA, and invade a country. You yourself were quoting that Rubio thought this was nuts. No one supported it. He went forward. So you tell me how it is that someone in China convinced him to do that.
No. That's not the contention at all. He says that logistical support, I mean, it's been written pretty widely. I'm sure you're well read. You would also come across those reports that China has logistically helped Iran. That's the only limited point he's making. No one's saying that China forced him to invade Iran.
Okay. But you're saying that somehow this is all China's fault and that China is somehow implicitly involved in making this go forward. And that's not true, and you know it. All right, this idea that somehow Lebanon is off limits. Oh, be serious! It's in the 10-point plan as one of the groups that has to be disarmed. So it is in the talks themselves. You know, I hear these shills coming from Washington with their talk points. Somehow, Mad Men diplomacy makes sense. Somehow, this is furthering America. Where is the blame that just says Donald Trump is out of control? He did this purely to, deflect attention from the Epstein files and his own domestic failures. This is the reality that we have here. Bringing China into it is merely a way to deflect what is already known.
Let's quickly go through the last talking point that we have as far as this particular subject is concerned. And here are some of the losses that the United States has faced. There's a E-3G Sentry aircraft hit by Iranian missile in Saudi Arabia. There's a F-15E Strike Eagle, 3 jets lost to friendly fire over Kuwait as well. And A-10C Thunderbolt 2 downed by Iranian fire as well. There are also, of course, more such aircraft than as far as the F-15E Strike Eagle is concerned. 1 jet was lost to enemy fire over Iran as well. And these are some of the military losses that the United States has suffered. There's also the CH-47F Chinook damaged on ground in Kuwait, the F-35A Lightning II hit and damaged by Iranian fire, and the KC-135R Stratotanker. At least 2 such jets damaged or lost have been reported. In the case of the F-35A, the emergency landing took place at the base. In the case of the KC-135R Stratotanker, details of the 5 jets at the moment, at this point, are not clear. Many other aircraft as well that have been impacted. Black Hawk helicopters 2 damaged during the rescue mission in Iran. As far as the MC-130J Commando 2 jets destroyed by US in Iran. And of course, as far as the C-130 military transport aircraft are concerned, crashed after being hit by Iran, and the F-16 fighter jet safe landing after a mid-air emergency. So just some of the damages that US has suffered. And the larger question is this, John Rossomando, before we went into those talking points, one of the points being made is that Ina Tangent particularly saying that somewhere there has to be a sense that enough is enough. That if Trump is indeed unhinged, if you are suffering these kinds of military losses, certainly at some point of time you have to stop back and think of what the purpose of this war is, and whether it is actually regime change, whether it is actually getting nuclear weapons out of the hand of Iran. At the moment, neither of those objectives have actually been achieved.
Well, let's go back to the 1991 Persian Gulf War, in which the United States had lost 28 aircraft. You had many Americans who ended up becoming POWs in Baghdad. I mean, this is to be expected in a war. I mean, back in the 91 Gulf War, you had a Scud missile that hit the U.S. barracks in Iran. So I think that what we're seeing here is the United States needs to reconsider some of its defensive strategies, particularly when it comes to dealing with drones. But I mean, if you look at Iran, I mean, its Navy's gone, its Air Force is gone, and it's been fractured now into competing factions in the RGC. I don't know if that's a good thing. I mean, it could be, really bad and has some downsides because there's no way of stopping the war. Maybe you might have one faction in Tehran says, "Oh, let's end the war," but the others keep fighting. So I think there's a lot of murkiness. And let's not forget, again, going back to the 91 Gulf War, I mean, if we were talking about back then, because of all the Americans that have been shot down, you would be saying that Saddam was winning the Operation Desert Storm.
But the fact is they haven't been able to really cut down Iran's ability to strike back, and its missile firepower continues to remain. Just last week, they shot down an F-15E. Isn't that a fact?
Well, I'm just simply saying that throughout the Persian Gulf War, you had similar happening. I mean, let's put it this way. We've degraded the ability of the Iranians to, fire the amount of missiles that they were firing in the first few days. And we have air superiority and pretty much can act with impunity over Iranian territory.
Is air superiority a fact? Lieutenant Raj Shukla wants to respond to you. Has U.S. air superiority demonstrably being impacted? Because clearly Iran appears to continue to have its firepower. It may be diminished, but certainly it's still a threat for U.S. when its aircraft fly over Iran. Lieutenant Raj Shukla, what would you say to John Rossomando?
What I would say to John is this, that it amazes me how America repeats its own historical follies with such magical resolve. You look what's happening. The Americans are very good when it comes to this 20,000 feet. Their air power is magical. But as they come closer to the ground, as we saw in the recent rescue operation, look at the number of aircraft being shot. The F-15s, the rotary wing Hepters. And when they come to ground, where the adversary is also 6 feet, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, they have been overwhelmed. Now, if the Americans had exited after the first week, when they had militarily neutered the targets, they had carried out the decapitation strikes with Claude and, Maven all coming together, that was magical. That was a golden off-ramp. Thereafter, Trump is getting sucked into this escalation trap. What is it? When you have overwhelming tactical successes, and I say overwhelming tactical successes, no country in the world could have rescued the 2 airmen just as the Americans did. But when these tactical successes do not result in strategic political outcomes, each time you double down on the tactics and you go and, get buried in deeper and deeper into the morass. This is exactly what's happening. President Trump should today realize that he has run out of, options and simply extract the American military from, what lies ahead. Or America is going to repeat Vietnam, this time in the sands of Iran.
Okay, let me bring in Lieutenant Colonel Mordechai Kedar on that. Do you agree with that contention that now is the time to pull out, because otherwise this could lead to far more chaos and a lot more unnecessary damage? Lieutenant Colonel Kedar.
At all.
Excuse me, am I part of this discussion or not?
The big problem is
Coming to you. Elam Karukai, coming to you. Just a moment. Just coming to you after this.
The problem with Iran is not so much the weapons which they have on the proxies which spread terror all over the Middle East. The problem is the regime. The regime is a terrorist regime, shouting every day, death to America, death to Israel. What is this? Would you agree that they shout death to India? What kind of regime is this? This regime belongs in the 7th century, not in the 21st century. They remained in the jihad of the 7th century. And this is why this regime should be changed. And this is the problem. The weapons are the problem. And this regime which thinks in the terms of the Mahdi, bring back the hidden Mahdi. If they have nuclear weapon as they want, this is the end of the civilized world.
Lieutenant Colonel Kedar, I'm not going to get into the argument about how good or bad the regime is. I'll put that question across to the Iranian panelists. But I must ask you this. You may have done away with the Ayatollah. A new Ayatollah has come. You have done away with several top leaders of that particular government or regime. Others have replaced it. And many would say much more hardline leaders have actually come in. You haven't managed to actually destabilize the regime in that sense. And therefore, many are asking, what was the purpose of this war? Because the government has not collapsed, nor has the regime.
the government should go back to the Hausa of Com, to the learning houses. This is where they belong. They don't belong in government because these people, first of all, they don't know how to run a state. They cannot run a state in the world of today. Maybe they can run a state in the 7th century, but not today. Today, the world acts according to totally different rules. There is international law. Look what they did to their own citizens in January. How many thousands of Iranian citizens were butchered in the streets by the regime. Do you agree to have such a regime in the world?
No, certainly not. Any death, even a single civilian death is one death too many. That's the principle I think we all would agree on broadly. But let me bring in Elam Khatkori. Would you like to respond to Lieutenant Colonel Mordechai?
Thank you very much for finally bringing me in. I have been here for quite a few minutes, only the second time I have had the chance to speak. I think the Israelis are trying to whitewash their own terrorism through all these stories that they're telling you about the so-called Iranian regime or whatever they're referring to. Here we have the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is a legitimate government which is supported by its people. Let's just count the number of children that the Israelis have killed over the past 2.5 years, not just in Gaza, not just in Lebanon, but also in Iran, in Syria, in so many other places. This war started of more than 170 school children in the Minab school. Mainstream Western press is right up. If this had happened inside Israel or some Western country by Iran or Hezbollah or whatever, you have blood on your hands. The Israeli regime, was it yesterday or the day before, they targeted many Lebanon.
All right. I'm sorry, but we're not able to get your audio very clearly. I apologize for the poor connection, but I will have to bring in Ashok Sajanar on this. Ashok Sajanar, what can we expect? Is there going to be an early exit? Is there going to be an early peace plan that can be worked out? Or do you see several more rounds of negotiations as we're expecting to see over the weekend?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Madhav. If you permit, just 1 minute on some of the discussions that we have been having here. Number one point I would like to make is no country, no regime is Snow White. You know, whether it is Iran or it is Israel or it is the United States, all have committed mistakes of this nature, whether it is killings this way or that way. So I think pointing fingers at one or the other, I don't think it really serves any purpose. The second point that I would like to make is I think the United States has been remarkably successful as far as achieving its military objectives are concerned, which is in terms of hugely degrading the nuclear enrichment capacity of Iran, in terms of the missile production and launcher production facility capability of Iran, as far as Israel is concerned in dealing with the terrorist proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, etc. But it has been very unclear about its political objectives, very unclear about its strategic objectives, and that is where it has floundered. That is where it has failed miserably. Now, as far as your question, Madhav, is concerned, I think the United States definitely wants an off-ramp. It definitely wants an exit strategy. So it is quite frustrated with the conduct of the war that has taken place after the second day when the whole thing started on 28th February. It has been a downhill for it and for it all these days. So it wants an exit very desperately. Iran also, whatever it might say, has been punished very badly. And it has also suffered hugely. So I think in terms of its future, that what the people would really desire, I don't think it wants more punishment, more pummeling, more pulverization. So that would also really be wanting that there is an end to this conflict. The first points are always, Madhav, maximalist positions. So what Iran has placed on the table, 10-point plan, it's a maximalist position. The 15-point plan of the United States is also maximalist. We'll have to wait and see. I think the first conversation.
Let me bring in back the Iranian panelists. You made a very important point. What's going to be very important to Elam Khatkori is what really Iran is willing to dial back on in terms of the demands that it has made. Do you see Lebanon? Do you see the Strait of Hormuz? And those very crucial points somewhere there's some possibility of Iran accepting something a little lesser than what it has currently demanded? Because both sides will have to mediate, will have to negotiate.
Well, we are hearing that in the previous negotiations that were ongoing through the Omanis, Iran had to make many concessions regarding its nuclear program, but then that did not lead to the Americans being satisfied. So I think the question here is not what Iran is prepared to negotiate on or what Iran is prepared to somehow compromise on, because I think the Iranians believe that whatever we compromise, the Americans somehow opportunity to strike back again. What the Americans have stated that they want in Iran is what they call regime change.
Okay.
So for the Iranians, basically, they have to be totally prepared for a second or
Iran is prepared to go for a second round of war. James Barlow, because they are saying that we were stabbed in the back once, there were negotiations on, we were prepared to take compromises on nuclear program, yet US went ahead and attacked us. So therefore, we are taking this with a huge truckload of salt. Respond to that, James Barlow.
Well, as I understand, when those negotiations first took place and Mike Witkoff confirmed this to Fox News, it was not denied by the Iranian foreign minister. And that is in Oman, that first round of talks, the opening line from the Iranian negotiating team was, we have, and I'm quoting, 460 kilograms worth of 60% of enriched uranium, enough to build 11 atomic bombs. That was the opening line. So when Jared Kushner and Mike Witkoff sat down, they realized that they were going to have very, very tough negotiations. That was relayed back to the president. And of course, the president changed his opinion about what was taking place.
Ina Tangent, do you agree with that? Because, the whole point of the last round of negotiations, Iran doesn't trust the US because they say we were willing to compromise. You have John Marlow who says there was a different version that US believe took place in terms of Iran not compromising. How do you respond to that, Ina Tangent? And how quickly can we see this actually, all that distrust being dissolved and peace prevailing?
You can't restore trust by lying about the process. The fact is the U.S. did attack. It had said it was going to attack it. It fixed the date for the attack. It was only waiting for the opportunity. So this idea that something wasn't progressing when you had the British confirming that they were making progress, I think is a complete and utter falsehood. And I'm surprised that he would mention something like this.
Okay. Lieutenant Raj Shukla, your response, what really are we looking at? What needs to be done to get a proper exit ramp for both sides to ensure a lasting peace in the Middle East?
First and foremost, we must distinguish between the utopia or our fantasy of strategic military aspirations and reality. So we were wanting to dismantle the repression apparatus. We have in place, state got an even more hardline apparatus. So I'm told the successor to Ali Larijani, Mohammad Zolgabadar, is such a hardliner that when he was appointed as number 2 in the IRGC a few years back, General Soleimani resigned in protest. General Soleimani had to be cajoled by the supreme leader himself, and he was appointed as the leader of the Quds. So these are unintended consequences. President Trump threatened civilizational erasure. You haven't been able to dismantle the IRGC. These are limits of military power. You threatened to bomb Iran into the Stone Age. Remember that Iran has options to bomb the Gulf allies into the medieval age. And look at what is now happening. I have no evidence, but my hunch tells me with this kind of military subjugation, you are getting people around the world to think that the only way to build deterrence is it to invest in nuclear prowess and ICBMs. By ranging at Diego Garcia, Iran has signaled to the world that much of the NATO bases in Europe are within our range. So these are the consequences of escalating beyond a point. It is time to roll back.
Okay, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thanks so much to all our panelists for joining us. Ashok Sajanhar, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, Ilham Kadkodai, as well as James Barlow, John Rosamando, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Mordechai Kedar, Ina Tangent. Thanks so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on this edition of the National Debate.